It's time once again, everybody, for Yes and Yoga. My name is David Ahern.
I'm Adi Bachchan.
Today we are so honored to have on the broadcast Mr. Dustin Strong, certified nutritionist. So good to have you, Dustin.
Thanks for having me.
Last time I called you a certified nutritionist and you upgraded it to holistic.
Holistic. You got to add that part in.
Got to put the holistic in the nutritionist, because otherwise it's meaningless, folks. You know what I mean? Today we're going to be talking about stress, and I know a lot of people out there are stressed to the max.
Right.
Why are people so stressed out? What's happening?
You know, we have a culture that says we have to do things right now.
Speaking of which, I got to run. I got to do something. No, I'm kidding.
You have me fooled.
Right, it has to happen right now, instantly. Yeah.
One of the things I noticed when I lived in Italy is that, you know, they had a saying that said, you know, don't be in a hurry.
Right.
Never be in a hurry. And in fact, there's an herbal company I work with that creates stress tonics just for America, because we tend to be a lot more stressed.
Right, and plus now with social media and we're on these phones all the time, you know, we have more and more deadlines. It seems like people
We're inundated with information. It's almost too much. There's almost too much stuff to sift through.
Totally, and this is one of the reasons why we actually started this show, is because people don't take any time for themselves. And people don't feel deserving to take any time for themselves, even 15 minutes.
It might not be priority. They might know, like, yes, self-care is good, but that's a luxury.
Right.
When it's like, no, it's kind of essential. So do you have people come into your clinic asking about stress, like coming in that, you know, what can I do?
Definitely, and when you're in holistic healthcare, you are looking at lifestyle things as well as nutrition, of course, and you want to find what's causing it. And actually, in holistic care, I always challenge people, if you're not asking the question, what's creating this condition, you're really not looking at it from a holistic standpoint. You're still reacting to it.
Right.
And that's what we talk about, is helping people get to a point where they can respond to things versus react. And that's kind of the goal of yoga a lot of times.
Yes.
Yeah, I find. So when you don't have certain minerals in your body, you're more prone to be reactive.
Okay.
When you don't have certain vitamins, you're more prone to be reactive.
Okay.
And those are the things that actually have been stripped out of a lot of commercially processed foods.
So sometimes you can be acting a certain way and it could be totally connected to nutrition. On that, what we're putting in.
Yes.
How do you identify that then?
That's a trick.
Yeah.
Well, you look at their diet, you look at what they are eating, and you can very clearly see that there's no way they're getting these whole food sources of vitamin B, for example.
Right.
And then processed cereal diet, a lot of children come in and they really
That's what I grew up on.
Yeah,
That's what I thought. Like, we were talking about grocery shop. It was like, okay, 3 different kinds of cereal set for the week, so have variety.
You know, here's the thing. I never really knew cereal didn't have that much nutritional value. I had no clue.
Absolutely. Well, because the marketing told us otherwise, right?
Yeah.
The marketing said it's got all of these great things.
And it's for breakfast.
Yes.
Like, it's your staple. It's your breakfast food.
Right. Who knew the Cocoa Pebbles did not have the nutrition that I thought it would? But, you know, what are you going to do?
You're going to keep eating it till you find out.
Yeah.
And, you know, it's funny, you start to see things in a different light when you recognize that your body is anxious. And I start to look at it in terms of the body's trying to find these things to function, and when they're missing all the time, you get these certain symptoms that are very obvious, you know, with anxiety being a big part of that, for sure.
So are people going to just start blaming it on food while they're stressed out now after hearing that?
That's an interesting
Are they going to
point.
just be like, sorry about that, but I'm just not eating well, so I'm stressed?
You know how it goes.
Yeah.
Possibly,
Really?
possibly. And I think there has to be, there's never just one thing. There has to be an approach that integrates exercise and mindfulness and nutrition.
Right, to reach the person.
Right, but our point with nutrition is, if you don't have these specific things, it is going to be very difficult to respond, regardless of how your practices and what they are.
Do you find that people almost make it their identity to be stressed, some people?
Oh, yes.
And that's what I mean. Like, they like to say, I'm stressed, I'm really stressed out, so therefore, please don't bother me because I'm stressed, I can't do anything, I'm stressed.
Well, a lot of self-worth is attached to being busy and being the person who's always got something to do. And we start to have that identity with people being lazy or not when they do take, like, time for self-care, as you talked about earlier.
Right.
I do find that even in my own life, it's hard for me to justify taking 5 minutes of downtime.
Because you could be doing work. You could be doing something else.
But you know, here's the interesting thing about it, though. I found that when I started taking time for myself, I actually got more accomplished, because I was more efficient with the time that I had. And that's the thing I think a lot of people miss, is that when you do the self-care, and that includes everything, eating well and doing, you know, whatever your exercise regimen is, by doing that, you actually do more things.
That's absolutely right. And actually, I kind of use that sometimes as my way to justify
Yeah.
doing it, because I'm like, I know I'll get more done if I take this break.
Right, and the other thing is there's something to be said for not multitasking too. That creates a lot of stress in people when they're doing 5 things at once. I'm like, how about do one thing really, really well, complete it, and move on to the next thing? But people don't do that. That's a big improv thing that we always talk about. Be in the moment. Like, be in the moment and just deal with whatever's in front of you as accurately as possible. And then when the next thing comes, you deal with that. And that actually eliminates a lot of stress.
Oh, I imagine.
You know, because even in live shows, like, people all the time will ask us, isn't it scary to go out there and perform without having a script? And the truth is, it's really not, because first of all, I know I got a group of people around here who are gonna support me, and you're so hyper dialed into the moment that I can't think 10 minutes later about what's gonna happen in the show. I have to be literally laser guided
You're
on what...
so present in the moment.
Yes, and that's what, and it reduces stress because you're in the moment.
That makes perfect sense.
Yeah, and I think that meditation and yoga gives you the capacity to do that, but how can we do that with diet? Like, what can we do? How can we be in the moment with what we eat?
Well, I think you're spot on in looking at just being careful and aware of what we're putting out. There is a lot of unconscious eating or stress eating, right? People will look to that as a way to self-soothe.
Creating. Used to be a big stress eater. I'm
Yeah.
like, oh, even when you say that, I'm like, it's comforting sometimes. Maybe not the best.
See, I never heard about it
response.
until you told me about stress eating.
Yes.
She goes, oh, stress eating, yeah.
I know.
Absolutely.
He was very confused. I was like, trust me, I'm not the only person that does that.
That stress
they'll
eats.
eat their feelings.
Yeah. Oh, definitely.
Because
that's a
people
big
feel a
challenge.
comfort in the food?
Absolutely. It's one of the easiest ways for someone to find a way to kind of make them feel better.
That's what it was, my coping tool.
It's a
Until I
coping
had
tool.
other things that I was like, oh, I didn't realize that. Where I was like, why do every time I get upset, I'm like, let's go through a drive-through. Let's get an ice cream. Let's get...
Is there a chemical reason for that?
I think it's more conditioning. I
Oh,
think
it
it's
is? Okay.
something that we've been given as children. Here, you know, to have this.
What are some tips you would give to help reduce stress
Oh,
from a
absolutely.
diet standpoint?
I think making sure that you're eating whole foods, of course, foods that are going to be nutrient dense. I'm a big fan of raw nuts and seeds. They are something that are very transportable. They're easy to take with you. You don't have to prepare them. And they're chock-a-block full of minerals and vitamins that are going to help relax you. So I think that that's probably the easiest go-to when you're thinking in terms of that. And you know, it's okay to occasionally miss a meal if you're going to make a bad choice. Kind of like, you know, it's better to not have a deal than a bad deal.
Right.
So honestly, waiting until you can get somewhere where you're going to eat something good, because we tend to think that we have to eat something right now, or my blood sugar is going to drop, or I'm going to have this issue. Whereas I think it's better to just push on until you can find something.
We talked about this many, 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 many years ago. People used to have to hunt for food, and you would hunt and eat one time a day. Food is so readily accessible now that people...
Like all the time, let's
like
eat.
this
Like
eating,
it's fun.
eating
It's fun
5,
to
6
eat.
times a day, you're not giving your body any time to digest things, to, you know, it's like we're just constantly eating, which means your body's constantly working.
Constantly, absolutely.
And that's hard on the body.
And the quality of the food is hard on the body.
Yes.
too.
Right.
So it's actually
Right.
taking nutrients.
If you're eating fast food every meal, if you're eating candy bars or from the vending machine, yeah.
And it's unfair because it's all over the place. I was in the hospital recently. My sister was in the hospital, and now this is supposed to be a healthcare facility, and everywhere I went, soda machines and candy machines and chips, and I'm like, oh my goodness, it's almost cruel.
Yeah.
It's like putting meth in a rehab center.
Right.
It's like, oh my goodness, why are we doing this? But it has become so common that we do it.
It is. Yeah, there aren't very good. They're almost like food deserts, they say,
Yeah.
that people live in, because there aren't a lot of these whole food choices.
Right.
And that's why you have to prepare yourself a little bit. You have to find and know where you're going to be able to get those. And I think a lot of times people get paralyzed because they don't think there are good options out there. But if you give them somewhere to go towards, as opposed to resisting going to McDonald's, it's going to be a lot easier for them to know, no, I'm actually going here because I know that they're going to have this
Right.
food.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
What can we do with stress to help?
Oh, stress. I mean, that's all about yoga. I mean, that's the number one reason. I mean, even just breathing.
Right.
Even just the conscious, just sitting there, slowing your breath down. That's one thing I tell people, even if they're like, I don't have time to do anything. I'm like, see how long you can inhale for and see how long you can exhale for. And then they'll tell me, okay, I went 10 seconds. I'm like, try to go 12. Try to go that. And it's like even just slowing the breath down, that will immediately change your nervous system and get it more in a balanced state.
You know, we were yesterday, we were actually practicing the yoga for this episode. And one thing we were doing a breathing exercise. And after doing it for 1 minute, both of us looked at each other and said, man, I feel calm.
Yeah, we were literally, we were
both
practicing, we're like, I really do now.
We looked
like
at each other and
we're
go,
like,
we were like, oh my God, this really works. Really, let's do a TV show. But it's amazing how breathing can transform just the way you feel.
and even just help reduce that stress, just that feeling, even that anxious feeling you can get.
Do you know, years ago when I started performing, before I walked out on stage, I'd always be nervous. Just a little bit.
Really?
Years ago. Like, I'd be just a little bit.
He's like, this one time only, this one time.
But what I found now is, because of this practice, I find that I'm walking out and I'm like, oh God, I never even thought about it. Like, it's become, but it strengthens the central nervous system in a way that really, it makes you feel like you can tackle anything.
It gives you a grit.
It
gives
does.
you a grit. And that's what I tell people anytime we're in class or practicing. So think of it like the gym. You know, you're building the muscles so that way you can go use them one day. It was like we're conditioning ourselves and strengthening ourselves. So when we do have the stressful events in life happen, because that's life, then you just breathe through it. Then you just roll with it. It was like then your body's conditioned to it and knows like, okay, we don't have to freak out. We don't have to have the stress responses happen.
And that's a lot of it, is that when stressful situations come up, many people don't have a strong enough central nervous system to handle it. And
or haven't practiced. You just haven't conditioned
practiced.
yourself.
You know?
It's the same thing, I mean, even with nutrition. If the food you're putting in, if you're not putting in, you know, the best choices, eventually it catches up.
Right.
You know, where when you need your health the most, it might not be there.
Right. So if you could offer people like some suggestions, what would you offer them to reduce stress?
Well, I honestly think sometimes thinking about being healthy can be stressful in itself. Thinking all the things you have to do in order to become healthy, and people wind up giving up.
It's overwhelming when there's so many things to do, especially if you realize, I think I do all of these things that maybe not be good. What do I do?
Right. Yeah. And I think two things. One, giving them something specific to do as opposed to, again, going away from sugar, giving them something that they can eat instead.
Oh.
And like you said, 1 degree of change. That's doing it very small over time makes it achievable and realistic. And so I would do something with children who are addicted to sugar, just challenging them with sugar-free Tuesdays. Just find 1 day a week that you can prove to yourself it's possible. Okay. Or if they can't make it, start with half a day. Start where you are, and then understand that you can build upon that.
Right, I totally agree. I mean, it could even be an hour.
Right.
You know, try to go 1 hour without eating sugar.
Absolutely.
And then if you do an hour, do 2, and then see how many hours you can do before you actually eat it, because it gives people, it's like, oh, I can do that.
Right, right.
You know?
Yeah, definitely. This was one point of disagreement I had with a physician I was working with, because I wanted to speak to the diabetic population. And she said, well, you can't ever tell them they can eat or drink soda. And I said, well, you can either have them reduce their soda, or they're just going to ignore you altogether.
Right.
So if you can go down from 6 a day down to 4 a day, that's a step in the right direction.
It is, totally.
And you have to reward that. You have to make more of the successes instead of, have them continue to feel bad about making bad choices.
And never start, and never even make that step towards it.
Exactly.
And that's the whole point of this show, is that we're encouraging people do 1 minute of breathing.
Right.
1 minute of yoga. It doesn't have to be even, just do a minute.
And recognize that there's a lot of value.
Absolutely. There's huge value in breathing consciously for a minute. I mean, there really is. And the other thing is, great teachers know this too, is that they know if you do a minute, you're going to do 2. And before you know it, you've done 60. And then the person who said, I couldn't meditate for 5 minutes can do 62 minutes.
Right.
And that's when you're like, well, and here's another thing that's really fascinating, is that when you do it and you train your brain, before you know it, you're like, oh my goodness, I just did 15 minutes. That's unbelievable. And then you realize you can do anything. And it's the same with diet.
Yeah, it's the same with when you make those little nutrition tweaks.
And the difference you feel over the course of that day is encouraging.
Yeah, and that's the beautiful thing. So you encourage achievable goals in nutrition. We say it in our realm, yoga and meditation. Now you combine both of those, and what happens?
Oh, then it's not double; it's quadruple.
Right.
How the results you're going to get when you start combining those different lifestyle choices with it.
And then before you know it, over a course of a year, you'll see drastic changes in your life.
Oh, absolutely.
Because it is a lifestyle.
Yeah. And then you become a teacher, and you teach other people how to do it. All right. Well, you ready to do some yoga?
I am so ready. I'm ready for that breathing.
Here we go. Ong Namo, and away we go.